the creative journey. It's easy to get lost, but don't worry, you'll lift off. Sometimes you just need a creative pep talk.
How do you get through really long projects that have all kinds of phases, all kinds of feelings, ups and downs, excitement, frustration, and then worst of all, apathy and even boredom? Like, if you do a long enough project, you're going to experience probably all of those things. How do you keep going? How do you know if you even should keep going and actually finish this thing? We're going to figure this out and get into all of that. Today's episode is a special one because it's a 10-year anniversary edition of Ask Dr. Pizza. Ask Dr. Pizza are our Q&A episodes, except in this version, we're going to have a listener live asking the questions in real time, which we've never done before. Jen Kwok is a musician, actor, and comedian with a bunch of great credits to her name, appearing in shows like Netflix's Friends from College and Showtime's Nurse Jackie, and has had tons of fun internet comedy songs travel all over the place. Jen is a longtime listener of the show. She actually coined the name of what we call listeners of the show, Creative Pepperonis. She came up with that. And I was just thrilled to be interviewed for this Q&A episode by such a talented, creative person. And the questions really teased out things in me that I've never explored on the show or even anywhere, just things I hadn't really thought about. So I'm excited for you to hear it. We talk about a super helpful trick to staying motivated when a project gets boring, how to make sharing work less intimidating, and why persistency may be more important than consistency. That one really got me thinking, and I think it's very true in my own practice, as well as Jen kind of hits on this in a way I haven't really thought about. Stick until the very end. Jen is going to share this way that Google Forms has helped her keep positive creative momentum along with friends of hers. And I'm definitely going to steal this from her and start doing this myself because I think it just sounds really, really great. All right, here it is, a special edition of our Q&A show, Ask Dr. Pizza. Maybe first you could just introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Okay. I'm Jen Kwok. I am a writer, performer, mostly a songwriter, have been a comedian and an actor in the past.
Yeah. And you've done a whole bunch of cool things. You did a song for Sesame Street, right?
Yes. That is
gosh.
A bucket list thing for sure.
That's amazing. What was it?
It was the song that was introducing Jiyoung, the first Asian Muppet on Sesame Street.
Whoa.
And they did a whole special for her, and she sang the song at the end with Elmo, with Big Bird, all the, stars. And it was on the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It literally just like hit every single like bing, bing, bing that I've always wanted to do as a musician. And I mean, writing words for Big Bird and then seeing Big Bird sing the words is definitely one of those moments, like just so surreal,
That is mind blowing. That is incredible.
Thank you.
And then second on the list, right below that is you're the person that came up with Creative Pepperonis, right?
That's right. I'm proud of that one. Listen, I know
it's not second on the list. I'm joking, but yes, you are the person who came up with that. Yeah.
Back in the day, I feel like, so I'm definitely a longtime listener. And I remember, in the halcyon days of Twitter, you were like, hey, any thoughts on what we could call like the listeners of the show? And immediately I was like, pepperonis, this is low hanging fruit.
You crushed it.
And you were stuck. You were a little apprehensive at first, which I also understand.
Yeah.
It's a strong choice.
It's a strong choice. And, we just keep it light and not take it too seriously. But I really, I thought that was hilarious, and I'd forgotten that was you. So thanks for reminding me. But it stuck.
Yeah. To all my fellow pepperonis out there.
Yeah, that's so funny. That's great. Well, thanks for doing this. I'm really excited to chat with you, and I know you have some questions prepared. Seriously, thanks for coining that, and thanks for supporting and listening for ages.
Yeah, listen, thank you. And like the community, like this podcast has really been part of my, I guess, creative adulthood, because I really started listening, whenever, like, I think like a year after you started, my sister, who is a designer, put me onto it. And there are so many ups and downs. I mean, I feel like listening to you talk about ADHD was one of the first things that helped me recognize it in myself. And then many years later, being diagnosed with that. And just so many times that I felt like I'm not doing, what I want to do, or even when I wasn't able to actively create for whatever life reasons, listening to the podcast like kept me going, like it kept my juices going. So I'm super happy to be able to talk to you. And you're also awesome. Like a celeb in our house, because I told my son that I was talking to Andy J. Pizza, and I said, is there anything you want to say to him? And he said, I love your books. I can't wait for you to write more. And can you write a book about bacteria? Because he thought invisible things.
I love it. That was my favorite part of science class, was getting to draw like cells and plant cells and like that. I still even today, it must be from drawing all of it, I have all of the stuff memorized of like endoplasmic reticulum, mitochondria.
Let's go.
Yeah, I loved it. That's awesome. I love that idea. I'd love to do like a magic school bus type invisible things where they're going in and seeing everything at the micro level. It's good. That's a good idea there.
Yeah, the
good
audience
tip.
is there for it. The mini pepperoni is asking for it.
That's so funny. Yeah.
So I was thinking about what I wanted to ask you about today, and I realized that the kind of like three questions or areas that I thought about all had to do with transitions. And so I think, as you and I were chatting a little bit before, we went on the record, but we're going through changes in our country right now, transitions all over the place. And very often it just doesn't feel good or catches you in a way that is surprising or just, confusing. And so kind of the first question that I have, because I think everybody just does it so differently, is about parenting, creativity, and ADHD, kind of the intersection of all of those. Because for me, becoming a mom was, I think for any parent, you just realize how much raising a child like stirs up all the wonder, the imagination, the play. And then it also is so taxing on your mental resources.
Very true.
So as a creative, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is like really opening me up so much. But then on the other side, having ADHD myself and being like, I need to use whatever tiny bit of executive function that I've like mustered together to help you get your shoes on and do everything to get out the door. And so I was curious how you approach it. Lean into the chaos, try to, put executive function on top of executive function. What is the pizza way?
Honestly, I feel like, making the show every week, I feel like so much about it is combating my own ADHD and realizing that it's not enough to have strategies. I have to have novel strategies. I have to have strategies that are fresh and new. And I haven't done this before because I've actually become allergic to, if I find myself thinking about all you need to do is every day get up at this time and do this thing. As soon as my brain starts doing that, I'm thinking, well, that's never going to happen. You could do that for 3 days. If you're lucky, you could do it for 7 days, but you can't have a plan that is now to infinity because you will never be able to muster up that level of executive function. And so I think for me, even though I'm aware of like, oh, okay, I've been making this show for 10 years and it's a lot of information. And for some people, that's a bit like information overload. For me, it's not, because I have to do new things all the time. I have to try a different way. And one of the things I think about all the time is, it doesn't really matter what's on my to-do list. I'm still going to have a low level or high level anxiety relationship with the to-do list, because the first thing to do is, how do you get yourself to do anything? That's just I know that's a dragon I have to slay every single day. And it's always different, because what worked yesterday doesn't necessarily work today. And, honestly, I say all that, first of all, not because it's an insight or it's going to help anybody, but maybe it'll at least feel validating with your own kind of journey. Because I think, I feel like getting close to 40, I'm really annoyed. I'm really annoyed by, why do I just have to do this forever? Why do I have to constantly figure my own self out? And then once I figure it out, it changes. So that's really, frustrating. But I think that there are some like basic things that I've learned. Like the number one is, once I get the train moving in the morning, don't let it stop until I've done the bare minimum. Like a lot of times I'll come home and my wife, or if my mother-in-law is there, like she comes and visits a few times a year, and they're like, how was the day? How'd you do? I'm like, got the bare minimum done. That's what I did.
Congratulations to us.
And yes. And so that's the main thing is, I've heard people say like, don't sit down. These are the random things. Like one of the things that like changed everything for me was getting slippers, because I've heard other neurodivergent people talk about this. Like, if I don't have shoes or slippers on, I'm not doing things. I'm like on the verge of sleeping. And it's just this like mental thing of like, oh, I've got shoes on almost. I'm washing the dishes. I'm getting stuff done. And so I don't know, just random little things like that. Like if I'm getting the kids off to school and I'm working on that, I can't then take a break after that. I need to roll that momentum straight into the next thing. And that's pretty helpful.
The object that like is in motion just stays in motion, and the object that is not in motion. That's so true. You know what? You just helped me make a connection with the slippers thing, because I'm wearing slippers right now and I'm doing this podcast. Yeah. But like sometimes when I'm like stuck, and then I'll be like, what is the next thing I do? And I'll be like, I don't know. How do I get out of here? And then I'll look over and I'll see my slippers and I'll be like, I'm going to put my slippers on. And then you're right.
It's the weirdest thing.
I never noticed that.
It's so weird. And I figured that out for myself. And it was kind of like a joke around the house in a way. And then I saw like random TikToks or something about neurodivergent people needing like shoes to do anything, to be like, oh, and it just changes your brain state. So sometimes on Saturday, if I'm like walking around the house trying to get stuff done and I'm finding like, my God, there's so much resistance. I don't want to do these chores. I don't want to do this stuff. And I think, shoes. And I put shoes on and I'm like, oh, I'm like a professional job doer now. I don't know.
It's like a superhero cape, but
it's
for your feet.
It's so dumb.
I really do have like 3 pairs of slippers. And I'm like, I feel like I subconsciously did this for myself. Thank you, brain.
That's true. It's so weird.
Oh my God. Wow. The second question that I have is still on the theme of transition. So one thing that I feel like I gained so much from with your podcast was the idea of seasons and creative seasons. Yeah. And I love that. I feel like we as a society are embracing that more. And then through the creative lens, I'm like, oh man, I don't have to feel bad that this is what I'm focusing on right now. Because your brain automatically thinks about the 47 million other things that you're not doing.
Yeah.
And so it took me a very long time, I think, to kind of get back into my creative groove after having my son. It was like post-COVID times, just many things happening. And so I spent the last year really being like, I'm back in my practice. I'm doing my thing. I have little communities and like buddies and accountability buddies, and I'm finding my way. And I feel like I'm on the precipice and maybe our combo here is part of it, of being like, I think I'm ready to go back into the world and maybe show something or share something.
Yeah.
And so my question around that is like, how do you make that transition over the threshold? Because I feel like you know, with the consistency of the podcast and even to a certain extent your posts, you have found a way to like keep very consistent. So maybe there isn't so much of a break, but I'm like, whoa, this is truly, I feel like there's like some sort of mindset switch, or, you know, time to step on stage, or just something like that,
Yeah.
that I need to like go through.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I feel like, this has been a theme talking to lots of guests recently around the idea of seasons or stages. I got really nerdy about Erickson's stages of life. Have you ever heard of that? It's
I've
like
heard of it, but yeah.
It's like a psychology thing. And I don't think it's like exact or anything, but it was really interesting because I'm kind of like obsessed with this idea of up until you leave high school or college, you have these very distinct, marked stages, like preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school. They're just like in college, they have these like expectations, what you're supposed to be doing, what's normal to be doing in that time frame. And then you leave that and it's like, okay, now the next stage is work from 22 to when you're retired. That's work. And then I've also become kind of really obsessed and interested in the idea of like the midlife crisis, watching, you know, when I was growing up, watching people in my life go through that and thinking, I'm never going to do that. And I don't think I am going to do that, but I can feel, oh, there's there's a natural life stage as you get to your, you know, late 30s, early 40s, where you have this sense of mortality that you've never had. You realize you're like, oh, the choices I made, like those are made, those cards are played, things are in motion. There's nothing stopping those things at this point. It's not infinite possibility, but you also have a bunch of other different things that you never had before too, that are positive things. And so I've been thinking a lot about the stages of life, because I feel this pressure, or the pressure of all of these changes make you realize like, oh, in the same way that I had to be a different person exiting high school and entering college, and college into real life, I'm having to access a different side of myself or develop a different side of myself. And so the only thing I know about that is I'm a real project-based learner. So I think that for me, I love a project because it's this perfect sweet spot between grit and pivoting. So grit in that you've committed to something for a period of time, if it's a project or a particular goal or particular achievement, but then pivot because there's also an end date. And I think, you know, honestly, like I don't have any intentions of shutting the podcast down. I love doing the podcast. It's just been one of the most creative and positive experiences of my life. But I do think that I realized like, oh, I had started the podcast thinking I'm going to do 100 episodes of this, and it probably won't be super successful, and that'll be enough and I'll just stop. But it was more successful than I expected it to be. And so I kept doing it. But now it's no longer like a project. It's more like a discipline or a practice. And so I'm kind of externalizing all of my thoughts here, because I think in it, there's some evidence of what this looks like, because prior to age 30, everything was a project. Everything was a journey. Everything had a goal, and there was kind of a telos to the thing that I was after. And then in the past 5 years, it's changed. It's kind of felt like it went from, oh, this is what I want to become, from my 20s to my early 30s, to now it feels more like, how do you be the thing that you wanted to become? Now you're just being it. And I think I'm getting comfortable with that. But My point is that's a dramatic shift. And there was a few years there where I was like panicking about like, where's the goal? Like how do I stay motivated without the, end goal? And I had a big shift into, stay motivated by the goal is to make an illustration that like feels successful, or like a book that feels like, I nailed it, or write another metaphor that has a punchy ending like that. And that could be something I do forever. And so I think the thing I'm trying to get at, I think, is just that I don't think anybody prepared me for the idea that there were going to be more stages after I turned 20. And those stages would look like learning to be a different kind of person in maybe a dramatic way. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's something I'm thinking about a ton.
I mean, it definitely, I think, brings up more questions for me. But I feel like, I totally relate to the fact that, before it was just so clear, you do this and then you do that. And again, seeing it through, raising a kid and being like, okay, preschool's over. And now kindergarten starts, and then here's a set of behaviors or, goals or milestones that go along with that.
Yeah.
And then we sort of kind of lose that as adults, and then it kind of, one version of it is just being like, you get a car, you get a, you get a wife, you get and then that is like a whole other set of, goals. But then having things that are intrinsic to yourself, like even what you were saying about having an end date, right? I didn't have an end date for like, how long am I going to be in this exploratory phase? But then when I kind of look at it, I'm like, this was kind of like my, little mini college that I made for myself, and so what does it look like to say, hey, I did that. And now let's move into like the grad school phase and like maybe work on my version of a thesis or a project of what I've spent, the last year throwing spaghetti on the wall about. But I think, when you don't have a container of a project, then it gets very nebulous.
Yeah, I think also I didn't ever think anything would, with picture books and the podcast mainly, a little bit with talks, but those two things, I never thought anything I did would work. Just like you're never planning for anything to work. And so now that some things have worked, and client work, I've done client work most of my adult life. And I kind of also thought that would go away, and it hasn't really gone away. It's kind of shifted. I never prepared for like being a person that has like some of the trappings of a regular job, and that you're just like, now you're just doing this thing on repeat. What was the thing you said about the thesis? Like you're using a project almost like a thesis?
Yeah, because I think that when you're kind of like exploring, which is kind of like, very thankfully what I kind of was able to do this past year was just like, try out different things to then be like, what is the next progression of that? And say, how do I, dig a little bit deeper and create like a bigger container for that? Yeah. Just like, I feel like projects, whether people are hiring you for stuff or you're making your own container, that is a way to just kind of like direct your energy.
What was what was the specific thesis idea? Was there a specific thing, or is it more general?
So there is a theme to it. So the last year, I have all these Post-its on my wall, and it's a song from every single year of my life that was important to me in some way. And
that's really cool.
That's
a great exercise. I love that.
So kind of my thought was, if I want to find out what is the next stage of myself as a musician, let's go all the way back and see the things that have influenced me. And I was really surprised, by some of the songs came up. Like I was like, oh, Queen is a huge influence on me, even though, if you listen to my music, you're not like, oh yeah, she's rocking out, but huge. And so kind of my next thought was, how do I turn this into, I don't know if it would be like a Substack or just something where I would have a way of combining that nostalgia with self-discovery and then perhaps making something new with it. So
that's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, the brain is starting to.
I love it. I've heard a similar kind of prompt where when you're doing work that's autobiographical or something, or even not, you're just trying to get a sense of who you are, you can just, do a timeline of every year of your life and just see if there's any clear memories that you can slot into those. And you can kind of look at yourself on paper in a way that might show you something new. And I love the idea of doing that through the lens of songs. That's really a cool way of thinking about it.
I mean, that's a benefit for having lived so long, right? You're like, I have so much material.
That's hilarious. And I love this. This idea around, because also I did a thing too where I looked backwards and I was trying to throw together like who I've been, when I was most happy, when I was feeling most creative. And the thing that happened this last time I did that was realizing that a lot of these things were embracing the season that I was in, and I can't go back to them either. I actually have to find the things that are happening now that are worth leaning into and embracing. And it kind of reminds me of the David White clip that everyone's probably seen it all over the place. But this idea of the pathless path, this part where that you're on your path when it disappears and there is no path. And now your life, the purpose of it is to just be someone that's never been before. And you no longer have the guides and the mentors. You don't have the models. And that, I feel like there's a part of me that just absolutely hates that. It just feels so overwhelming. And it did, at least for a few years. I feel like I'm a little bit more comfortable with it.
I find that comforting, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I can definitely see how it is a little, oh no.
Yeah. Well, what makes you feel comforted by it?
Well, I think, even to what you just said, where it's like you just do something that no one's ever done before. So then how can you fail?
Yeah, true.
Like even if in your failure, you're like, oh man, no one's failed like that before.
Yeah, that's
all part of it.
Yeah, that's funny.
So I had a question then about that like micro moment of sharing something. Like, I don't know, even with like, I recorded this podcast. Now it's time for people to hear it, or I made this thing. Now I'm going to post it. Like what have you kind of used to navigate those moments of transition?
I've heard Seth Godin talk about this, where the reason he did a daily blog for years and years and still does is just making that a muscle and just getting used to that and becoming, it normalizes it so that you're not really overthinking it. It used to be that the podcast day was like a source of anxiety. It was like, oh my gosh, I put a bunch of thoughts out again and an illustration and whatever. And for the longest time, at first it wasn't anxious because nobody was listening to it. So I didn't, who cares? I was just trying to do something. Then there was a good chunk in the middle where I was like, oh my gosh, people, even like, people in my life knew like Wednesday morning, just like he's going to be tense because he just put a half an hour of himself on the internet. Now it's funny because my wife got more involved in the past couple of years, and Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, she would be scheduling some of these things, and that would be a lot of anxiety, and she would start feeling it until she got a little bit more used to it. And I think now that I've done it for 10 years, I do have I guess one of the things I've been obsessed with my whole life is watching creative people's journeys. Even when we were kids, we would talk about like actors' decisions and the timelines of their movies and musicians. I don't know why. I don't know if that's normal, but that's a thing that me and my brothers and my dad kind of would talk about or comment on or think about, like, why did they make those choices? I don't know, because it comes to mind like Nicolas Cage. You're like watching this, like these different decisions. You're like, what is he doing? What? Okay, that's kind of cool. But like, I don't know. I've been very like I've always thought a lot about the decisions that people make as they move through their career. And so I actually heard this thing from Jerry Seinfeld the other day where he was talking about writing. And I thought this is like one of the most brilliant pieces of a creative advice I've ever heard. And he was saying, like, when you're working on the writing and you're thinking, this isn't that good, this is what you need to think. Yeah, it's not that good. That's why you have to work at it, because you're not that great. And I just thought that has served me really well, to just be like, to me, it's just a lot of work. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of revision. There's a lot of like learning craft and trying things and putting out tons of stuff. For me, that's my life. And so I never thought, I knew when I was in high school, I knew that in high school art class, I wasn't the best in high school at drawing, right? So there was always a sense of like, for me, it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of growth. And so I never looked to like, a Tom York, or like these brilliant people that just
tumbles out somehow.
I just knew like, I'm not like that. And so the people that inspired me when I'm like looking at their creative journeys were people that were really prolific and allowed themselves to make mistakes. I guess people like Nicolas Cage.
That was like the best example where it was like, we were all wondering what was the thought process.
But there was some, I'm kidding. And also, and I'm not like a Nicolas Cage fan, but I did think I would like that kind of career where you do so many things that people aren't precious about it. And I remember if you watch someone like, I don't know, The Weeknd came to mind for some reason, where he had these like just hit after hit, and it got bigger and he got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I just kind of felt like by the time he did that show that got panned critically, I thought that was inevitable. Like it was inevitable. You can't just climb up to the right. And actually, so yeah, okay, super long-winded answer, but I think for me, accepting that my creative journey was going to be just messy and it wasn't all going to be good. And I wouldn't always know what the best stuff was or what was going to be the game changer, but I had a consistency of releasing and making it a muscle and making it normal.
That makes so much sense. Yeah. Like, yeah, because even looking back at like when I was doing 1 or 2 comedy shows a night in New York, it like the nervousness wasn't there. It was like, let me just finish this so I can like get in a cab and get to the next show and do it again. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think to a certain extent, like the fact that you're like, it's one of many reps, or however you look at it, instead of being like, all right, I'm going to do one perfect rep in front of everyone. And that will determine the fate of the universe.
Yeah. Yeah. It's too much. And I've always just kind of admired the musicians that have had, the Innocence Mission just put out a record. This is like, I don't know if they have like 17 records. They've been doing it for years and years and years. And it didn't make a huge splash. It's not going to make a huge splash, but they have their built-in audience that they've made a relationship with, and people know what they do, and they're going to keep doing it. I think I just always wanted to be like that. I just always wanted to, because I wanted to do it forever. And I also just didn't, I don't know. It was so sad to me if someone just has this huge, I never wanted to make creativity like being in the NBA, where you're like, your best years are in your early 20s. I could be wrong. Like maybe I'll have a stage later where I'm like, man, I suck and I don't want to make this anymore. I don't know. Who knows? But I feel like to me, it's more of a practice than I think making that transition of releasing stuff to being in your bunker, making stuff. You want to like eliminate all the friction and all the fear and pain by just making it really, really regular.
Yeah. I feel like a huge theme for me has been persistence versus consistency.
Mm.
Because I'm really persistent. Like I have this embroidery on my wall that I started in 2014. And
Not the one with the rectangles.
oh, they're here. Ooh,
Oh, it's a different
yeah,
thing.
it's this blue cross stitch. I started it in 2014 when I broke my leg.
Yeah.
And then I kind of forgot about it, like moved twice and then took it out again. And I finished it last year. And I was like, hell
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. That's
but
awesome.
the kind of consistency of being like, what if I had worked on this a little bit every day for you know? And so I feel like that's what I'm trying to like get back on that horse. Cause I feel like, I have the muscle now of being like, I can show up for myself. And then now it's the muscle of like, how do we get myself to the stage of sharing?
The persistency versus consistency. So are you saying the consistency is like making it a rule and it happens at a particular time and you can do that? Is that what the consistency is? And persistency is more like, even if it's sporadic, even if it's like, you know, even if you go cold and hot, you're going to keep coming back and pushing it.
Yes. So I would say kind of to your example before, for me, one thing that I have been consistent with is vocal work, because, you know, there are some vocalists who just like, I just did a workshop with Sarah Bareilles and she was like, I've had to take a voice lesson for the first time in my life in my 40s. And I was like, you've been singing like this the whole time. And like, you basically just open your mouth and it happens.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was like, vocal wise, I've always, you know, and kind of similar to what you said with the novelty, like I don't every day do the same vocal exercises. Like I'll be like, oh, there's this Boys to Men song that there's a really cool riff here. I'm just going to do that riff, you know, for like the next week until I get it. And
what Boys to Men song are we talking? Like you know,
End of the Road.
End of the Road. Yeah. That's a classic. Yeah.
Yes.
I wish I could sing. That sounds like a real great one to be able to belt.
Next phase, Andy. Next phase. That's your midlife crisis mission. Here's your rap album.
Yeah, good.
So I have kind of one final question, which I think kind of ties into what we've already talked about, but kind of, how do I put this? So many times I will have these projects that I come up for myself, to work on. And then a bigger client project or, you know, even life thing will come in and I'm like, I'm derailed. Yeah. And then when that thing ends, to come back to it and I'm like, that energy is gone. Cause I feel like a superpower of ADHD is we follow that energy. You know, like when we're in that mojo, when we're in that flow, whatever it is, you're like, it's so present. Yeah. And so kind of coming back to something that has been a little interrupted and you're like, now I come back, like it looks different, it feels different. How do we continue? Yeah,
honestly, that's a painful question because the answer that I have is not one that I want to hear myself. And so the most important projects I've ever done have all gone through, like the ones that have really had a positive impact on my creative journey and my career. Almost all of them have had that trajectory exactly, where I'm really on fire for this thing. I'm obsessed with it. I'm like, I can't stop thinking about it. I'm working on it like crazy. And then for whatever reason gets derailed. I have to do something else, focus on other projects, whatever, client work. And it might even be like a couple years until you come back to it. Right. And in that zone, when I've been in that zone, especially the first couple times, because you don't have the history of what do I need to do in this space. I would get into this feeling of, this is kind of like the through line for the whole show is this growth mindset, because the growth mindset is all the bad feelings, the feelings that don't feel positive, resistance or difficulty or challenge. You have to be able to discern which of these are things you need to push through and which of these are things that say you need to turn around. I heard a quote from It was Tim Ferriss quoting somebody else recently, and he was saying you have to be able to recognize what's an opportunity and what's a temptation, and you have to figure out like where. And that discernment is so key, and that it's super key to knowing the growth mindset too, because there are things that you're doing where, oh, this is actually pushing against my nature. This is pushing against my values. This is uphill because this is never going to happen for me. That's a different feeling than this is uncomfortable. I don't know if I am excited. I'm, whatever. And you have to really get into parsing out which feeling you're experiencing. But for me, if there was something where the fire was there in a way that was, I knew this was like authentically connected to who I am and what I want to be about in the world. And I, was really on fire. I know there's going to be a middle part of that marathon where I don't care anymore. And the thing is that the times that I was willing to push through that anyway and figure out, and a lot of that turned into like hacking my brain in one way or another. One of the biggest, probably the biggest tool that helps me is talking to somebody about it who I've never talked about this project to, and having to like repitch it, see their reaction, get some freshness to it. And that's like when we were doing the Right Side Out project, the series that we did last year on the show about ADHD and my mom, that was such a long, I'd been working on that for 10 years easily. And there were, by the time it's ready, and this is the other thing that happens is that I'm going to circle back to that in a second. But the other thing that happens is, another huge through line on the show is strategic creativity versus exploratory creativity. And finding the sweet spot between those two things is really, really difficult. Another way of saying it is the plotter energy versus the pantser energy. Can you have a goal in mind and then reverse engineer the plot so that it ends where you want it to end? That's a delicate balance, because there have been books that I've written or things like Right Side Out or whatever, where once you break the story, once you know where it's going, all of a sudden it's not as fun for you to get there and finish it because you're not making up stuff. And I love talking to Julian Glander last year on the show, because he gave me a real good hack for this, which he would say when he was working on his screenplay, there'd be sections where he'd just leave something beautiful goes here. And he knew that when he's animating that later, he's going to be able to have fun. He's going to be able to make something up. And so I'm very, and I've said this a billion times, but I'm very obsessed with the Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm thing of, we have an outline and a plot, but we don't have a script. We're going to improv the script. So like finding that sweet spot is so essential. And the thing is, when we did Right Side Out, was the same thing that happened, because I had the overall structure, the 3-act structure, really down. I knew exactly what I wanted to say with it. I had probably 3 or 4 stories where I was like, I know what this is about. But then as we moved through it, I think probably what helped me get through it was realizing that I think my fire didn't turn back on until when we were working on the second of 6 episodes, and we came up with something. Sophie and I are writing, and we came up with something I didn't know we were going to do. And it was one of the best things in it. And I was like, oh, I can actually make this thing new. And then I can, like, it's just that beautiful thing here. I realized, like, oh, we have a few spots where it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be interesting. Oh, and as we move through it, it doesn't end how I thought it was going to. And so, yeah, I think that trying to inject some of that pantser energy, that exploratory energy, where you're like, okay, I know you feel like you have it figured out. You feel like you kind of are done with it. What would it look like if you're like, well, even just for my own interest, what if I just chopped this thing up and reinvented what it was? How could I make it exciting again? I think I did that every time I got into that spot. I'm glad. That's a great question, because I don't think I've ever fully thought through that enough to kind of codify it to do it again on purpose. But I think I will do that now.
Yeah, because I think like when you said hack your brain, I was like, all right, let's listen up.
Yes, because you have to.
Yeah.
It's the only way.
I mean, and it's very similar to like the novelty thing. Cause like, I definitely agree with you where it's like, you know, to kind of, for me, struggle with like structure and be like, we're going to make an outline now. And then sometimes it ends up feeling like, okay, I have drawn the outline of everything. And now I just created a color by numbers for myself. And that is not interesting.
No.
You know?
Absolutely. And, another image that really helps me think about this is the archetype of like the two-headed monster and just realizing, okay, and this is what it feels like to be ADHD. So you have one who really wants to do this, really wants to follow through, really wants to finish a project, put it out in the world. And, you have one head that's like that, but you have the other head where they're like, I ain't doing that if it's not fun. How is it? And so I think just realizing like, I'll never be the person that is just the one head that's just, I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do and I'll be proud that I did it. And just realizing like, I'm always going to have that. How do I entice that part of myself that needs to get, and I'm working on a book right now where I'm going through the process of the thumbnails, which is a really fun process because it's like, you're making it up and it's very novel. And I know the next stage is going to can be more challenging where I'm going to clean up the sketches, but I realize like, oh, I'm leaving looseness so that ideas are going to happen in the sketch phase. And then I even had to do the same thing. That's what I loved about starting to work traditionally, more traditional with paint and stuff, is happy accidents in Photoshop when you're drawing digitally almost never look good. They're like, you have to be precise when you're working digitally. You can't, for me at least, I can't really do that. Whereas now that I'm mostly painting it, the last stage is still fun. And again, that's a hacking my brain thing is I'm like, okay, when I move to the paint phase, there's going to be elements where I don't even know how that's going to work until I'm doing it. And I think sprinkling that novelty throughout the process is really important. The only thing I push back on there is like, on myself, that's the other head chiming in. It's like,
yes.
By the way, also the part of the two-headed monster, the other head that's like real serious and planned and all that is like, yeah, but keep the novelty, sprinkle it throughout the whole process. But also, I guess I'm just constantly petitioning creatives to allow themselves to plan, try to have a plot, allow yourself to have some strategy and outlines because, we watched the whole season 1 of Severance again. And I thought this thing is like such a clear example of what's powerful about plotting. It's like so much pays off. It's so satisfying for the viewer. And it was probably so satisfying to come up with that plot. And then the challenge becomes, how do you make it interesting? Because making a show like that is going to be, so much time and like finding those places where you can do the insert beautiful thing here. Make sure you have a bunch of those. I don't know. I'm very obsessed with trying to figure out how to maintain the balance of those two things.
Yeah, God, yeah, I definitely relate to that because the two heads, the one that's like shiny object.
Yeah, absolutely. You were mentioning a thing before we got on here about an accountability partner and a practice that you do. And I thought that would be great to end the episode with. Do you want to just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I have an accountability buddy. We have been checking in, I would say almost 3 years now. And so we center it around the new moon.
Nice.
We, just have like an hour chat and kind of over the last half of year, we added this element, which I think has been a game changer for both of us because we are both neurodivergent, have a million things. My friend Mindy Raff is also a comedian, writer, singer, doing all the things. And so the container that we made, which I believe she was the one who came up with it, and then we came up with the questions together, was to use Google Form. because I don't know if there's other people out there who also love a Google form.
Yeah, I do. I love.
Right?
Yeah, it's a great tool.
Yeah, whenever I join something, they're like, okay, just fill out this quick Google form to let us know your preferences. And I'm like, yay, it's like a quiz or something,
Yeah, it is. It feels like BuzzFeed or something. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I feel like that like dopamine hit is great. And so we now have this weekly Google form, which we call our creative container check-in. And we have 5 questions on there. The first question is to name 2 or 3 areas of creative focus for this week. And so for a while, I've been working on musical theater. So I'm like, I want to feel like I'm 50% there with a song demo.
Yeah.
She might have, a Substack draft, something like that. So very concrete, 2 or 3 things. The second question is then 2 or 3 tools that we will use to help us get in the flow or navigate any potential challenges. So, knowing like for me, I'm like, once I get into Logic Pro and I start working on the demo, I will probably get too obsessed with EQing something when I'm like, listen, just put the ideas in. This is just a sketch. And so then one of the tools might be, check in with yourself every 20 minutes, set a timer and take a walk and come back so that you don't, get trapped in a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
The third question is 2 or 3 things from the previous week's focus. So like the previous week's number 1 that you're proud of, the wins,
That's great.
like, I was really scared about, doing this key change, but I watched a couple YouTube tutorials and I navigated it or whatever it is.
Awesome.
And then the fourth thing, this is actually new for this year, is something that inspired or motivated you this past week. So, very often I feel, even all the quotes that you were throwing out, during this episode, there's just conversations that you have, like probably my next week's answer to this number 4 question will be like my convo with Andy J Pizza,
Yeah.
So just putting out things like that, influences, inspirations. And then the 5th one is just literally any additional thoughts. Because,
it's good to have
like,
an extra box. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to be like, I was super sick this week and I didn't do anything. Or, I was feeling super bummed because of this, or, this came up, or this is a new, diet change that I made and I think it's really helping. Yeah. So, that is kind of like the leave room for like life question. So yeah,
That's
so
awesome.
those are the 5 questions.
How did you agree on those questions?
We talked it out initially, and so this has evolved a little bit. So they were always kind of somewhat similar, but we did reshuffle the ones this year. So I think another important part of the process that we're now seeing is to maybe just check in every 6 months or so to say, is this still working? Because like noticing, that some of the stuff that we were writing was like, hey, I read this book and it really XYZ, or I, watched this show and that jogged my mind for this.
Yeah.
And so adding that and then having all of this flow into a Google sheet. And then we can kind of look at each other's responses. And also for yourself, like I'll look back and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I've been working on the same demo for 2 months.
Yeah.
Or I'll be like, hell yeah, I worked on the same demo for 2 months and now it's done, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So just having this record is, I think, very self-affirming. And then, having that added accountability. So kind of like once we finish, I believe we choose like Sunday, Monday to kind of fill this out. And then we just text each other an emoji to say I did it. And so, just choosing whatever emoji we feel that day. If it's Christmas, Christmas tree, if it's pizza.
That's really cool. How did you, when I was a young whippersnapper, I was very nerdy about having these sorts of chats with friends. And, it's natural as you're getting out of like college and people have similar goals. It's kind of built in a little bit and you can kind of get by with that for a while. I feel like as I've gotten older, I've gotten more just embarrassed about doing stuff like this. But I know it's such a it's such a game changer to have an accountability. Those times in my life where I had that, and we were aware of like what each other's working on, and we're actually investing in each other. It is really just super important. How did this relationship come to be?
So Mindy and I have known each other forever. We started out on the comedy scene doing bringer shows in like the early 2000s. And
for people who don't know, tell them what that is.
Oh boy. So at a comedy club, if you're a new comedian, you need to guarantee or bring usually 20 people to the show so that you have an audience, right? Because no audience wants to see a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And usually, it's basically you convincing all your friends to go, and they have to buy a ticket and 2 drinks. So it is an expensive evening. You are bringing that club hundreds of dollars so that you can stand on stage for 7 to 10 minutes and do your thing. But so we really went through the trenches together, and we're both musical comedians. So then for a while we were on the college circuit together, and we kind of, were in and out of touch. Once COVID happened, we all, were online, Instagram, and kind of keeping up with each other that way. And I kind of had this moment where I think my son, had reached a certain age. So I was like, okay, I kind of know how to be a parent now. And I was like, and I want to get back to creative practice.
Yeah.
So I put out there, to just my followers, who wants to be an accountability buddy? And so I believe like 5 or 6 people raised their hands. And to this day, 3 of them are still really going strong.
Wow.
And so Mindy and I, we had this long history, but then kind of reconnecting and seeing how our paths are parallel now. And then I have another accountability buddy who he and I totally met straight up on Instagram. And he was, a travel influencer at one point. Like some of my friends, I'll tell them, yeah, my accountability buddy, Steven. And they're like, oh my God, I follow him. Like he's really hot or like whatever. But he and I were, checking in for years. And then we finally met in person a couple of years ago. And that friendship just truly went from being online to IRL as well.
Yeah.
This has really helped me a lot to just be through ups and downs. And that's what also I feel like I got a lot from, although it's more one-sided, a podcast like Creative Pep Talk, where you're just like, man, I'm witnessing this person's journey and it makes me feel less alone.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I totally relate to that. And I think we overcomplicate things like this of, I've got to find the perfect person to do this with. And we got to do the same kind of things, have the same goals, whatever it is. And it's got to be this like bestie that we know everything about it. You made it so simple just by putting it out to your followers and just picking a few that worked and rolling with it. And I think that's really inspiring. I think people need to do that. Jen, thank you for doing this. This was super fun. Thanks
Andy.
For raising your hand for doing something like this.
Yeah.
And thanks for coining the term creative pepperonis. That is that
my legacy.
That had a big impact on my everyday, honestly. And I just completely forgot about it. All right, that's your CTA for today. Go get yourself an accountability partner. Get a buddy. If you don't got one, get one and get some of those Google forms going. I love this idea because I love the idea of having a record and kind of a document beyond my notes app that has an ability to string together some consistency and some patterns. Because for me, my creative energy and my ideas and my direction feels so all over the place every single week. What I'm interested in, what I'm focused on, what I think matters, it can just be all over the place. And I'd love a place to kind of see a bigger picture and also a different set of eyes to help me see what the patterns are, see what I'm consistently interested in, and just have something that grounds that whole experience a little bit. So I love that idea. Encourage you to do it. I'm going to explore doing it myself. And massive thanks to Jen Kwok for coming on here and doing a live Ask Dr. Pizza. Go check out Jen, jenkwok.com, JenKwok.com. Massive thanks to Sophie Miller for editing and co-producing this show. Thanks to Connor Jones of Pending Beautiful for audio and video edits and sound design. Thanks to Yoni Wolf and the band Y for our theme music and soundtrack. And thanks to all of you for listening. Until we speak again, stay pepped up.